nation is not familiar with the concept of shepherding. In fact, some have called for the dismissal of all shepherding language from the Bible, saying it's not appropriate to our understanding today. They suggest we should use words like guides and mentors, focusing on direction and wisdom, or servant leaders, which is about humility rather than authority. But both would miss the mark, because if we truly understood what a shepherd was known to do in Jesus' time, as well as a small amount of shepherds continue to do today in the Middle East, we would have a better grasp of how wonderful it is to have him be our good shepherd in our lives. This is why scholars suggest that we look to the 23rd Psalm as we study that text from John. Not a bad suggestion when you consider it is probably one of the most popular biblical passages we know, definitely the most popular psalm. It's inspired musicians and artists. St. Augustine said that it is the perfect martyr's psalm. And so many liturgical guides continue to suggest we share it at funerals and memorials because oftentimes it brings great comfort in sorrow. In his ministry, United Methodist minister and author, Reverend Charles Allen, would assign various parishioners struggling with difficulties in their lives to read the 23rd Psalm 5 times a day for 1 week. He said this: the 23rd Psalm is a pattern of thinking, and when a mind becomes saturated with it, a new way of thinking and new life are the result. There is a shepherd in whom we shall not want nor need a thing. Shepherding language, it's powerful. So I want us to go through this beloved psalm to better understand its meaning for our lives, looking at the sheep who are us, right? And the good shepherd who is God in Jesus. Here's the background. Many of the scholars believe that David wrote this psalm, and he's writing it in retrospect. Therefore, the psalm can be divided literally in 3 sections. You have the time before he became the king, so that was when David was actually a shepherd boy himself. There's the time that he was a warrior fighting for the army of Israel, and then there's the time he was older as the king reflecting. And so what I want to do again is go through this line by line, because I do believe that as we study it, gain a better understanding of what a shepherd does, we will appreciate that text of the I am. So David starts with, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." This was the favorite verse of our dearly departed church friend Al Fosnot. He said this was his declaration of faith. He believed that with God, anything he wanted, anything he needed, God would always provide. And David believed that too. In fact, as we go on to read the psalm, we're going to see how that faith is played out in his life. Like, he maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Do you know that sheep will actually walk continuously if they were on their own? They'll get up in the morning and they'll start grazing, and they'll go for up to 6 hours at a time. They will not stop unless somebody is there to make them stop, to make them slow down, to digest, and to even cool off. In this line, David is claiming that God leads us to rest. Because as sheep, sometimes we just keep going and going and going, don't we? And we don't always slow down. This is why I believe the Sabbath is to be kept holy. Because when we gather on the Sabbath, what are we doing? But we are resting our minds, our bodies, our souls with God. We gather to draw closer to God, to find rest in God. Especially again, as we tend to be sheep that keep going. But God gives us the Sabbath to rest so we can continue on in our journeys, just like the sheep. He leadeth me beside the still water, he restoreth my soul. Because of their heavy coat of wool, sheep are poor swimmers. So I do not suggest you throw a sheep into a pool sometime, because that would just be cruel, all right? They're gonna sink. It just doesn't work. And so a lot of times, sheep have actually been scared to go near running water because they're afraid that the water is gonna pull them in. So what they've discovered is the best way to find a place to drink is where there's still water. And if a shepherd is leading the sheep out on their journey and there's no still water, the shepherd will gather up rocks and place them in the creek, in the stream, to get the water to be still. And that's when the sheep will go over and they will find their drink. They will be restored. And so David is saying that God doesn't push us beyond our own fears. Just as sheep can fear that running water, you and I have our fears in life too, right? And David says God's not going to come at you with those fears. God's going to be there to restore you, to help you through those fears. Moving on, he leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. This is one of my favorite pictures of sheep because if you look closely, they're wearing glasses. That's right, because sheep have very poor eyesight. Evidently, they cannot see beyond 15 yards ahead of them. And if you're wandering around in Israel, I've been told you want to watch where you're going, right? You want to watch because it's very dangerous. It's easy to fall down a slope, or they've said that sheep have actually even fallen off cliffs. So they need somebody to guide them, to keep them safe. In this statement, David claims we are going to be safe. We are going to be guided down the right path, the path that God promises to travel with us. So we don't have to worry about going off the wrong way so long as we're willing to follow God, our shepherd who leads us on that right path and travels with us. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. God's traveling right along. In Palestine, there is a valley known as the shadow of death. It travels from Jerusalem to the Dead Sea. It's very narrow, it's dangerous, and it weaves its way through the mountain range. David is reiterating the fact that whatever challenges we may experience on our pathway, the pathway God's leading us on, we know that God will be there. God will help us get through pain, through uncertainty, through loneliness, even the threat of death, because God is with us. David follows that with this: the rod and thy staff, they comfort me. And the reason why he shares these is because those are the two tools that shepherds will continue to use. You have the rod that is about 2 to 3 feet long, and it's used as sort of a weapon to go against predators. If there's a wolf or something else that comes after the sheep, they have this rod that can stop them, the predator, from getting too close to the sheep. And then the staff is actually about 8 feet long, and at the end there's this crook. Now, if you've ever been to a service where a bishop is present, when they process up through the aisles, they are always carrying this staff with this crook at the end, and I never understood what that crook was for. Well, here it's because if the sheep start to wander off, or if they start to fall, you can grab hold of this sheep. You can grab hold of them with that crook. And so that's what that staff is all about. I'm sure as David wrote this, looking back, he saw God guiding him, using that crook to lift him out of the jaws of the lions that were coming after him, or giving him the strength of a rod as the giant is there that he's facing, not to mention the various battles that he went in to fight again as a warrior for Israel. David knew it was God who gave him guidance through those difficult times, and David is saying God will be there too, using the right tool to get us through those challenges. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. In the Holy Lands, there are various plants that grow on the pastures that, if eaten by sheep, would actually be fatal. So there are also thorns that could harm them. And so each spring, shepherds will go out in the pastures before they release the sheep out, and they'll gather up all those enemies to the sheep, the thorn plants that will make them sick. They'll gather the enemies, and then they will burn them. So the pastures then become safe for the sheep to travel on. Here, David suggests that God knows our enemies, right? God knows what is at work to destroy us, and each of us, that's going to be something different. but God is at work to save us, to take away those enemies, to keep us safe from those enemies. And further, God prepares a way that can lead to healing if needed, if we run into those enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. As sheep travel, a lot of times they get bumped, they get bruised, they get scratched. And when they come into the gatefold at nighttime, the shepherd will inspect each sheep to see if they've been hurt at all. And their tradition was if they were hurt, they would put oil on those wounds, oil that would heal them and make them feel better. Further, the shepherd would always provide this water for the sheep to drink as they come into that gate. Usually it was one big cup. Once again, David is reiterating God's compassion, God's healing for us, especially if we have faced some of those enemies. And then, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. I like how Walter Brueggemann, a biblical scholar, explains this verse. He says, you may run from trouble your whole life, but God's goodness runs faster. Don't you love that? You may run from trouble your whole life, but God's goodness is running faster. So it's like, look out. I picture like one of those football players who's always trying to protect the quarterback, right? They're coming out and they're trying to block everything from getting right at you. And that's what God's goodness is doing. It's coming out and it's working to battle off all the bad, all the evil that may be coming towards us. That goodness is going to keep going and go past it and prepare a way for us. So imagine all that goodness that is continuous, as David says, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. As David wraps up his reflection, he's probably thinking about those times that he turned to God again and again. Because he admits there were times he turned away from God, right? There are Psalms that explain that. There are stories that we know. He turned away from God, and yet God never left. God was always there, ready to receive, ready to embrace him. And so we are to recognize that too, that God is always there for us. God never leaves us. We may wander off, but that shepherd will always be there to receive us and to embrace us into the fold. Now, do you see why it's so important for us to understand that psalm when we consider what Jesus means when he says, I am the good shepherd? Because the word good that he uses here in Greek is for noble, authentic. In other words, he is the model shepherd. He cares for us. He is the Lord God with us, will protect us, will defend us, will heal us, and will save us. So that when Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, I know my own, and my own know me, we should never shy away from that shepherd language. Rather, we should embrace it, as it testifies that in Jesus, God reveals that we shall not want anything.